G'day everybody, welcome to Faith, Culture, Politics in Australia with Mark. I'm Mark Neugebauer. Going to be covering a little bit of time in this episode talking about the South Australian state election in March 2026. Going to go through a little bit of a slideshow presentation. Going to go through a few things that I think is going to be important for South Australians and voters to have a look at. Particularly on the side of your, I guess, centre right, conservative sort of leaning voters, voters that are disenfranchised. They've seen sick of overreach in government. They're looking for more accountability, transparency, honesty, and so forth. And talking about obviously quotas, preferencing some political parties that I suggest. You obviously have to do your own research and due diligence, and I'm only giving suggestions, so not affiliated with anybody, but I'll get into it because I'll cover that in a few slides. I'm going to go through a few slides and a website and so forth, and cover that for you there. So we'll get into that now. So the title, obviously, South Australia Votes 2026. The content of this video is for information purposes only. Information can change, so it's up to you to do your own due diligence and research as well. But obviously, wherever I'm uploading on the whatever platforms, if you obviously want to give feedback and comments and so forth, correct me on things, discuss a few things, that's fine. This video will focus predominantly on the Legislative Council for the 2026 state election in South Australia, because I believe that's where it's possible to really start getting some change. We see obviously the Labor Party has got a real stronghold in South Australia in regards to lower house seats. So my focus is really about the Legislative Council and try and give you some information on that. Although I'm mentioning names and parties I'm not a part of or endorsing a particular individual or party. I'll be discussing individuals and political parties who I believe, in my own opinion, align with the principle of national and individual sovereignty, minimisation of government and bureaucracy, honesty, transparency, accountability from politicians and bureaucrats, minimised influence from global corporations, think tanks, lobby groups, and keeping the legacy political parties honest. I'm not funded by or supported by any large donor, lobby group, think tank, or political party. I do receive some small financial support from a number of small individual donors via my social media platforms and buy me a coffee just through my platforms. My views are my own. And the research and things that I've done is my own, and as I said, I can get things wrong and people can call me out, which is fine. The only thing I'll be upfront and honest with you for on every occasion is that I would never ever on any ballot put any Greens party or Greens candidate, Labor Party or Labor candidate, or any progressive left-leaning candidate of any political party or persuasion on my ballot. And that's just me. So that's just for a bit of a disclaimer there. Now, if we get into it, have a look at some numbers. So in the 2022 South Australia state election, there were approximately 1,266,719 enrolled voters. In the 2025 federal election, there were approximately 1,306,665 enrolled voters in South Australia. So that was up 39,946, so nearly 40,000 voters enrolled increase in those couple of years. In the 2022 state election, the total votes cast in the Legislative Council were approximately 1,129,077. So this leaves around 137,642, so nearly 138,000 enrolled voters who did not vote, who chose not to vote. In the 2025 federal election, the total of South Australians votes cast in the Senate were approximately 1,202,114. This leaves around 104,551 enrolled voters who did not vote in the federal election. It was down around 32,488. But as a note, people are generally more likely to vote in federal election compared to the state. Now, obviously, I'm raising this is because I know there's a lot of disenfranchised voters out there. There's a lot of people that just say, well, who cares? Why should I bother? It's not going to make a difference. There's a lot of people that believing the governments are corrupt and corporations, some people's viewpoints of that, all those sorts of things. I'm not dismissing your frustration. I don't totally align with the thought process that some might have in that regard, but I understand why you're misguided. In the 2022 South Australian state election, there were approximately 40,000, nearly 41,000 informal votes cast for the Legislative Council. So these are ballots that were rejected as invalid, so donkey votes. So people just go in there and go, well, what the heck, stuff it, I'm just going to write. No, none of the above, don't really care. In the 2025 federal election, there were approximately 38,000 informal votes cast for the Senate by South Australians. So these ballots were rejected as invalid. So in the 2022 South Australia state election, there were approximately 177,482 votes that were wasted. So that's a combination of your non-voters as well as your informal voters. So that's nearly 180,000 votes wasted in the last state election. In the 2025 federal election, there were approximately 142,593 votes wasted, which is a combination of the 104 non-voters and 38,000 informals. So for this video's example, I'm going to use an average of between the two. So I'm going to, average. I'm going to add those two together, and then divide them by 2, and it gives me roughly 160,000. So that's 160 odd thousand South Australians that either chose not to vote because they've had enough. They're enrolled to vote but chose not to. And then obviously a number that were informal, just they rock up and scribble on the ballot, and it's an invalid vote. So that's quite substantial, and I'm going to go through that a little bit more as I go through this video. So the current Legislative Council as it sits, so these are South Australian members of the Legislative Council whose term expires in 2030 on the left. So you've got 5 Labor members, 4 Liberal members, a Green senator there, independent, which is Sarah Game, who was previously elected as One Nation, but is now with Fair Go Australia. So these are your MLCs that whose term doesn't expire until 2030. So in the 2026 state election, on the right, you'll see the ones that are up for whose term expires. Now, some may not contest any further, some may. So you'll see 4 Labor members there. You'll see 3 Liberal members there, and then independents. So you've got Connie Benares as SA Best, and Frank Pangallo, who I believe obviously now gone over to the Liberals. Tammy Franks is Green, who was previously Greens, and Jing Li was formerly Liberal. So they're the ones that are whose seats are going to be replaced in 2026. The ones on the left have still got another a few years into 2030. So just wanted to give you a bit of an overview on that, so you're sort of aware. Now let's talk about quotas here, and I'm just going to go through this a little bit quickly, and I'm going to sort of give my thinking on sort of rough quotas. But again, people can call me out, correct me, whatever. That's okay. And this is kind of how I've come up with it. If I'm wrong, I'm happy to be called out. So in the Legislative Council, we're looking at filling 11 seats. So Legislative Council uses statewide proportional representation, single transferable vote. The quota to elect one member of the Legislative Council is calculated as the amount of formal votes divided by the number of seats plus one, which is called a Droop quota. So the enrolment is projected for 2026 at around 1,328,188 by June 2026. That's per the Electoral Districts Boundaries Commission, and people can look that up if they want to. You have to search up Electoral Districts Boundaries Commission, December 2024 report. So that's up 21,523 from actual from the actual 2025 federal enrolment that I showed you earlier. So it's a in stand, it's sort of, it's in line with the increase from 2022 through to 2025 election, and then obviously projected into 2026. So based on this, if projecting quotas, formal votes would be the amount of enrolments, average of wasted votes calculated, which I calculated earlier. So enrolments of 1,328,188, which is what's projected. And minus the wasted votes, which is around 160,000, which I showed you earlier, gives you 1,100,000, roughly, circa, around about 1,167,651, yielding a Legislative Council 2026 projected quota of around 97,305. Now, there's a few different, ways that I looked at this. It can range between 90 to 100,000, but for this example, obviously, I'm picking up on the 97,305 is the quota to get one member elected to the Legislative Council. So each MLC candidate to be elected would need around that 97,305. Ballpark, all right? So that's ballpark figures. So just so you can keep that in mind, in your mind there. Now, if we have a look at 2022 first preference votes and how they went for the Legislative Council, you'll see Labor obviously at 402,000, Liberal at 374. So that gave Labor a quota of 4 members in the Legislative Council, and as I'll explain a little bit in a minute with Anthony Green's, he does an amazing, obviously, he does an amazing review on politics, his musings. He's got a website, very, very knowledgeable. So we're going to go through that in a minute. But Liberals at 3.85 quota, Greens got one and a bit. One Nation 0.47, then Liberal Democrats 0.37, and so forth. So it goes on to the portion of quotas. So you'll see in the ones that I've highlighted blue, the total of those, all those smaller sort of counted numbers, they all add up, including the little independents on the right-hand side there. They all add up to 0.22 of a quota. But if you combine all the blues, the cells that I've highlighted blue, it gives you a quota of 1 Legislative Council seat. Now, as I'll explain in a minute about the preferences, a lot of that quota was wasted because the preferences didn't flow, because people didn't allocate another party or individual. They didn't give preferences correctly, so they were pretty much wasted. But we also find out, obviously, that Labor ended up getting across the line with an additional, so they end up with 5 just because of the way that certain preferences did end up flowing in there. So I'm just going to take this quick opportunity to go through a little bit of Anthony Green's little commentary about how the preferences flowed, and how One Nation, when you have a look at, they only had 0.47 of a quota, so not a full quota, how Sarah Game was actually elected. So I'm just going to share this site from Anthony Green and go through that with you just quickly. His analysis on this. Now, if I scroll down, and I'm just going to read this bit for you. And I know, I mean, he's done. You can go to his website and check this all out yourself. He's very comprehensive. So I'm only giving you a sort of a bit of an overview. And again, for me, I'm making no apologies. It's not going to include Greens or Labor or left-leaning parties. I'm talking, parties that I feel, that I've seen could be more, or independents could be leaning more towards, your sort of centre-right. Conservative kind of parties. But let's have a look at the summary of preferences here. I'll just see if I can make this a bit bigger for you so you can see it. So we're just going to read through this with you here. The tally of first preference votes and then the initial trickle down of preferences through the candidates on the Labor, Liberal and Greens tickets elected 9 candidates on filled quotas. These were 4 Labor, 4 Liberal and 1 Green. At this point, no candidate in the count had a quota. The highest party total after excluding filled quotas were One Nation, so they had 0.5 Labor had a 0.4 beyond their 4 filled quotas, so they had 4 full quotas plus 0.4 left over, a certain amount of votes, obviously. And then you had Liberal Democrats who had 0.4, and then you had Family First 0.36, and then the quotas distributed across 16 other groups was 1.2881. So look, you know, you saw my spreadsheet, so it's not totally lined up, but Anthony Green's is very accurate from there. But the next highest partial quota at this point was legalized cannabis with 0.25, too far behind Family First to catch up. So Family First was 0.36. So the exclusion of the lowest polling candidates and distribution of voter preferences now began. By count 617, there were 2 remaining Labor candidates, Russell Wortley with 35,000 votes, and 6th Labor candidate Megan Spencer with 2,698. The ungrouped independent had been excluded, and only 1 candidate remained from the other 18 groups on the ballot paper. At this point, the leading groups were One Nation, Labor had 4.42, Liberal Democrats 0.39, Family First 0.3689, and then 1.2 quotas. So one full candidate could have been elected out of the ones that were distributed across 15 other groups. You know, I hope that makes sense. During the continuing distribution of preferences, Family First passed Liberal Democrats at count 5,608. Only 4 candidates remained. So Russell Wortley, Labor, now led with 54,000 votes, just rounding it. 0.6 of quotas, having attracted 16,000 preferences, 13.7% of votes distributed. So he picked up some preferences. Sarah Game, with 53,000 votes, had 0.59 quotas, having attracted 7,450 votes as preferences. Tom Kenyon, Family First, was now in 3rd place with 42,000 votes, picking up 9,000 from preferences. And James Hole from the Liberal Democrats was now in 4th, picking up 4,166 in preferences. To this point, 68.3% of preferences from excluded parties had exhausted their preferences for not choosing between the 4 remaining candidates. Exhausted preferences represented 0.88 quotas, which is nearly 1 full quota, right? So this is the point I'm trying to make to you about preferences and not picking other parties, regardless of you know where you're aligned with them. And I'm going to go through that a bit more in this video. James Hole, Liberal Democrats, was now excluded with only 3 candidates remaining in the count of his preferences. So he had people, the 72.6 were exhausted, 12.6 flowed to Family First. So Liberal Democrats, 12.6% flowed to Family First, 10% to One Nation, and 4.3 to Labor. This put One Nation back ahead of Labor. The totals now stood Sarah Game. So these are Liberal Democrats' preferences benefited Sarah Game. She had 57,000 votes, so attracted 7.6% of votes distributed. Russell Wortley with 56,000, and Tom Kenyon 48,000. To this point, 71.3% of preferences from excluded parties had exhausted their preferences. Exhausted preferences represented 1.21 quotas by this stage. Game and Wortley could have been declared elected at this point, but the exclusion of Tom Kenyon went ahead to determine the order of election. Of his preferences, 70% exhausted, 17% flowed to One Nation, and 12.8% to Labor. All right, so this was Tom Kenyon from Family First. When he got taken out, this is how it flowed to One Nation and then to Labor. So the final totals were Sarah Game, even though she didn't have a full quota, to make up 1, and Russell Wortley either, Sarah Game elected at number 10 as a member of the Legislative Council with 65,000 votes and only 0.72 quotas. so attracted 10.6 of votes distributed since count 617. Russell Wortley, he ended up being re-elected as the 11th member of the Legislative Council with 62,000 votes. So very, very close, with 0.68 quotas having attracted 12.8%. To this point, 76.6% of preferences from excluded parties had exhausted their preferences. Exhausted preferences represented 1.5 quotas, so 1.5 candidate members could have been elected with that. It was equivalent to 1.58 quotas, which could have gone to another party. Once again, new voting system demonstrates its underlying property of favouring candidates and parties that start the count with a higher quota or remainder quota for parties that elected more than one member. Despite a good ballot draw and finishing in third spot, the Liberal Democrats failed to attract preferences. Right? Failed to attract preferences. There was no exclusions where the Liberal Democrats attracted more preferences than other parties, and Conservative preferences that did flow favoured One Nation and Family First. Green surplus preferences were crucial for Labor, staying ahead with only 30% exhausting on the exclusion of the final Green candidate, the lowest exhaustion rate at any exclusion. Once again, the new system demonstrates that parties can no longer leapfrog from low votes on preferences, with preferences now determined by voters themselves. It is clear that voters tend to gravitate towards parties they know over other alternatives on the ballot paper. And you can check out that whole blog of Anthony Green's there. If you like, you can. There's a fair bit that he covers so much, very, very detailed, and I'm only sort of giving you a bit of an overview. So that's anthonygreen.com.au on there. So let's get back to my little presentation here and slide. So you can see from that, one thing that it does demonstrate is that Greens and Labor and other sort of progressive left-leaning type parties are very well organised to organise preferences, and this is what the Conservative side has to do a lot better. The centre-right Conservative side has to do a lot better in regards to preferencing. Right, so again, this is the link for anthonygreen.com.au, and this is it's SA 2022 Legislative Council results finalised. So he was going through all these ones that got knocked out because of their quotas, right? So it's really important for you guys to understand that it's important to preference similar-minded, like-minded parties and candidates. So currently known registered parties for 2026 state elections. Sorry, this slide's turned out a bit wonky, but obviously is the Australian Labor Party, Liberal Party, Australian Greens, SA Best Incorporated, Jingli Better Community, Sarah Gay and Fair Go for Australians, Pauline Hanson's One Nation, Family First Party, Legalised Cannabis South Australia, Animal Justice Party, Real Change SA, National Party of Australia, the Nationals, United Voice Australia, for Unley. Libertarian Party is showing those registered, but I've found out since that they're a registered party, but because of the new rules that Labor brought in, which has obviously really impacted independents and minor parties severely. And then obviously you have and you have SA Socialists, I believe, running for the first time in this state here. So these are known registered parties, but yeah, obviously made a bit of found out since making some inquiries that the Libertarian Party, even though they had over 30,000 people voted for them, they're previously registered under Liberal Democrats are not running, and nor is Gerard Rennick's People's First not registered in time for this one. So the breakdown of parties and potential voters, and I kind of did want to go through this, and this is what I was saying to you about. I've got names there, and again, guys, this is just my opinion, right? I've put some names here, and you can call me out if I've got it wrong. I'm looking at parties that are your centre-right, conservative, leaning parties. So I'm obviously staying away from your far left, your Labour Greens, your sort of socialist aligned, your progressive left leaning parties. Right? I'll make no excuses about that, because I myself align with a lot of the values from the parties that I'm mentioning here. So that's why I've brought these up. So yep, if you want to criticise me for that, fine, that's okay. Go right ahead. But if you have a look, this is what I currently know as of delivering this video. Obviously Carlos Cuerva is at #1 for One Nation, and Rebecca Hewitt. I've got Real Change up there. Stephen Polaris looked a little bit into Stephen. I think he's was looking at running as an independent with the new rules. He's obviously created Real Change, so he's there. I may have it totally wrong in regards to where he sits on his political stance, and then whether or not he runs a second candidate under Real Change. You've got Family First, who I know has got Deepa Matthew and Christopher Brohy. I understand are running United Voice Australia Party is Mark Aldridge and Matilda Borden. With Fair Go now, as I understand it, Henry Davis is no longer involved, and Jake Hall Evans has moved up in the #1 spot, and Angela Rogers is there at #2. And then I've got some spots there for independents. As I understand it, there's some pretty good quality independents that have a sort of conservative centre-right sort of lean to them. So that's why I've got them in there. And then you'll see your Liberals there on the right-hand side. You've got Ben Hood, Heidi Girolamo, Rowan Mumford, Taya Hennessy, KD Singh, and Belinda Crawford Marshall. Now, I'll explain a little bit why I've got Liberal there. And it really just comes down to really just not I prefer people not to exhaust their vote, just to waste their votes. I'd rather have them go somewhere, and especially some pretty strong Conservatives. And I know I'm going to get some flack here from people that say, the Liberals are cooked. I totally understand. As a party, the machine is broken, but there's some good candidates that have some pretty strong values that align align with my viewpoint, and that's why I did want to put them there on the right hand side. And you can see People First in the right hand bottom. People First not registered, and Libertarian Party registered but couldn't not eligible to put ballots in for the 2026 election. So if you have a look at the quotas, then if you have a look at the number of votes, first preference votes, One Nation on the left-hand column there, One Nation, Liberal Democrats at the time, Family First, Australian Families, and National. So total combined vote for all of them is 132,516 as your first preference votes. Now, I'm not for 1 second disillusioned at the fact that Liberals are probably going to bleed a lot of votes, and that One Nation vote for this time round is going to be reflecting a lot higher, I believe. I believe Family First will also pick up some Nationals because of Liberals are massively bleeding. I think there's a lot of people that, regardless of how well the party's formed with Ashton Hearn taking over, I still think they're going to bleed votes at the election. And then you had SA Best and Real Change. Now, I'm really not sure, the political tilt lean for them, but their votes added up to 20,000. All the others were 21,431. People that you see in the middle cells there, people that didn't vote, 121 plus the 39, so it's a total of 160, which I mentioned before. So the total votes that I kind of look at roughly, your centre right Conservative votes, and if we say people that have lost touch and have just not bothered voting because they reckon the system's broken. I really do believe that a lot of those people are ones that believe there's too much government overreach. They were really burnt through COVID, and they're going, well, what the heck? Why should I bother? I hope, and I do believe that they are the ones that would likely vote for these type of parties and candidates. Now, I'm stand to be corrected. I'm happy for people to call me out on my views and thoughts on that. But if you have a look at the total votes on that at the bottom middle cells, you had the 335,293 is a total. And if you divide that by the amount of quotas, which I mentioned earlier, which is 97,305, so that's the quota, estimated quota to get one member of the Legislative Council in, that's 3.45 quotas. That's nearly 4 candidates. So if we had a much bigger percentage of people that voted, and people that didn't donkey vote and stuff up their ballots, we'd have a potential with those numbers to get close to 4. Now, if we pick up a ton of more votes that have bled from the Liberal Party and maybe Labor Party's on the nose, the Greens might be on the nose because they don't like the Australian flag, they don't like Australia as a country. They're very much the way it is. Obviously, the heritage of the country, all these sorts of things. Maybe people are realising that the Greens aren't really, the Green. They definitely haven't been the Greens of the conservative conservationist Green of decades ago. Who knows? There's a lot of votes that could bleed into these parties and candidates, which could increase the quota. The potential quota to 4 or 5 even. It really depends on you, the voter, and this is why I'm doing a bit of a video to explain this. And then obviously on the right hand side with the Liberals, they had 374,000, so that's nearly 4 with preferences. Obviously, you got to pick that gets them over 4, but if we're looking at a massive bleed from them, some commentators are saying that they may only even pick up 2 seats, which would get Ben Hood and Heidi Girolamo in. Now they're hoping, obviously, with preferences, they'd obviously get Rowan or put someone possibly like Taya Hennessy in as well with preferences from others. Traditionally Family First have chucked their votes there and so forth. So I'm hoping that makes a little bit of sense, but let's move on to another slide here. So it's explaining the ballot a little bit. As this is above the line and below the line. I'm only talking Legislative Council. So vote above the line, so you mark a 1 for your preferred candidate, and then mark additional boxes for your preferences 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So this is optional, right? So they say it's optional, but what I'm saying, if you are going to vote above the line, it risks exhausting your vote if you only put a 1 in the box above, right? That's all you're obligated to do. But what happened? Let's use say One Nation, for example, and if the quota is 97,000, and let's say 120,000 of South Australians vote, 120,000, that gets Carlos in. But there's 30,000 votes that end up going that end up trickling down into Rebecca Hewitt. Now, with preferences, you may pick up another bucket load of votes that brings her up to the 97 quota, which then gets her elected as well. But anything above that, let's say you got 220,000 people that decide to vote for One Nation, right? It's a big uptick from last time. But that gets both of them. That's 180,000, nearly 200. So you've got 20,000 votes left over. Now, if you only put number 1 on One Nation, that's 20,000 votes that end up going nowhere. They get exhausted. But if you also tick, say, a party like Family First or an independent that you like, and you put them next, the votes are going to once they get both elected, your votes continue. They don't get wasted, right? So that's why my recommendation is my recommendation is to vote below the line and mark all 12. But I'll go in there in a minute. But if you want to vote above the line, please don't just put a 1. Look at your Conservative candidates. Look at your candidates that align with the party that you like, and then preference the other parties in order that way, right? And then you've got the below the line, in line number 1 for your preferred candidate, but then you have to vote. You have to number 2 through to 12 as a minimum. So if you don't vote, if you don't put a 1 through to 12 in all the boxes, and you happen to stuff up the numbering, it stuffs up the ballot. So it's really, really important. This is the below the line voting is the best way that you actually make your vote count for the actual candidate that you want in the Legislative Council. But you have to mark 1 through to 12 as a minimum. As a minimum, you can vote. You can mark more, but 1 through to 12 is a minimum. But if you vote above the line and you mark six boxes, then you're going to end up electing the people that are on the bottom line anyway. So I'm just going to give you an example with this. So this is an example only, and as I've explained before, this is just purely used to show, as I've used the names and the parties to show you. I'm not telling you who to vote for, who to preference. That's why I'm not, in my example, I haven't put numbers. It's not what I'm about. I'm not about to tell you who to vote for, but I kind of just want to put some names up there to show you. So if you looked at, say, for example, you've got One Nation as Group A, then you've got Carlos and Rebecca underneath in the below the line. So above the line is your Group A, B. Above the line, you're at One Nation, you've got the parties. Below the line is the names of the people within that group. All right, I hope that makes sense. So you know you've got Family First, you've got Deepa and Matthew, Deepa Matthews and Chris Broey. They're in Group C. You can see Family First. So if you tick, let's say for instance, you did, you wanted to vote for United Voice with Mark Aldridge and Matilda Bowden, right? And the quota is 97,000, and you voted for them, like I said before, and you've got a couple of 100,000 people that decide to vote for United Voice. That gets both Mark and Matilda in, because the quota is 97,000. Just as an example. So that's nearly 200,000, but there's 220,000 of you that voted. So there's 20,000 that need to go somewhere. Now you might think, oh, I like United Voice, but from there I actually like, Fairgo, or I like the Nationals, or I like an independent. So you mark that, and those 20,000 votes don't get exhausted. They actually go on to another person. So this is where it's really, really important. Now, let's say you mark, let's say you mark all of those that just decide to go on. Let's say you mark One Nation, Family First, United Voice, Fairgo. You number them 1 through to 6, whatever, and you still then don't want to see your vote wasted. And we know that it's a very good likelihood, if you have a look at Liberal in Group I, they're very likely that Ben Hood and Heidi's going to get in. Commentators are saying they're going to get at least 2, possibly 3 preferences. If and I understand Taya Hennessy's a strong conservative. If you feel like that you don't want the votes to be exhausted beyond the, let's say, for an example, you go, okay, I'm going to put United Voice, One Nation as number 2, Family First as number 3, Fairgo at number 4, National as number 5, Real Change number 6, maybe an independent there at number 7, and then you could put the Liberals at number 8, which would mean that once Ben's and Heidi's quotas are filled, your votes won't be exhausted. They'll trickle down to someone like Tia. Now that's totally up to you. If you're so over the Liberal Party that you absolutely don't want to give them an inch, you don't want to give them nothing, that's up to you. I'm just giving you the idea that your vote can be trickled to as far as you want it to go, and without it being exhausted by numbering enough of the candidates. Now, in my view, and this is why I've put them all there, is in my view, the majority of these parties are very similarly aligned on a lot of things that have been pushing back against the government overreach and legislation that's been rushed through, and obviously looking in the Legislative Council to try and get some combativeness against in the Greens, combativeness against Labor, hold Liberals to account. The more people that we can get in that Legislative Council that are aligned with the values that we believe, the things that have happened over the last 5 years, you can actually make a difference in that and challenge that, regardless of whether you think there should be a better system, or whether this system's just not going to work anymore. Because this is the thing, right? So the 160,000 people that aren't voting anymore, the 160,000 that have gone, I'm over it, like, government's just crap, it's a corporation, whatever your views are, we can't make a difference. If nothing else, what's it going to hurt for you to give one of those candidates that have put their head above the parapet, that are hoping to challenge the government for a few years while you're working on your new system, while you're trying to build the alternate system and try and have those conversations and communities in that? You've got nothing to lose apart from getting out on a weekend for, depending on how far you have to travel, half an hour to an hour, whatever, and put a vote next to a candidate that said, I don't agree with what's happened over the last 5 years. We have got tyrannical government, we have got government overreach, we have got no transparency, no honesty, no accountability. What have you got to lose by getting out there and putting your vote if you don't want to vote in the lower house, whatever, but you can make a real difference in the Legislative Council. So I'm imploring you, the 120,000, 160,000 that don't want to vote, want to put in a donkey vote. I'm encouraging you to at least get in there and fill out the big long ballot, and look at your Conservative candidates and parties, and give them a chance to at least stem the flow of tyranny that's going to happen in this state, because we see that Liberals aren't going to claw back much. The Labors, they've got the golden touch at the moment. The media's on their side. Malinowskis is really smoothing over. He's got the PR campaign. He's got the media. They've got the money. He's put in the legislation to make it harder for others to try and get out there and get their message out there, right? We need as many people, good people, in the Legislative Council to push back on that, while you continue with the alternative system, while you continue with building your community groups and your ways of getting outside the system. But allow the people that want to try and stem the tyranny within the system, give them an opportunity. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm calling you to do. All right. And just last little slide, what I wanted, because I know this has gone on a bit, and you can throw me questions, whatever, reach out to me, that's okay. But I just wanted to finish on this, is remember, you as an individual control the vote. Regardless of, even if you might like One Nation, you like Family First, whatever they're telling you to say, well, we want you to vote this way, you own the vote. You own the vote to the individual candidate that you want to select, that you want to see in the Legislative Council. And that's why it's so important. If you vote below the line, you have full control. But obviously, if you vote above the line, whoever the party is up the top, then the people underneath are going to get the vote. But number as many boxes as you can above the line, and below the line at least 12. Okay, at least 12. Research your candidates, not just in the Legislative Council, in the upper house, but also in the House of Assembly, the lower house. Research them. Really make an effort to put a tick next to the people that you really want in there. Call them, attend their office, attend town hall meetings, ask them to a community event yourself. Most importantly, vote wisely. Because at the end of the day, your children's future depends on it. Absolutely depends on it. And so much more now for those that are conservative lined, whether you're Christian, whether you're conservative, whether you're centre right. If you don't want to get hammered again this election, vote wisely. Think about what you're doing. Take the effort. If you're enrolled to vote, You just mark the boxes for the ones that have shown and demonstrated to you that they have pushed back over the last 5 years against tyrannical overreach. They've demonstrated that they've called out bureaucracy. Give them a crack. Give them a chance. Don't waste it. Don't waste the 106. That's nearly 2 candidates. 160,000 to 180,000 votes. That's nearly 2 candidates. So I really encourage you to think about that. And if I've got things wrong, fair enough, call me out, reach out, whatever, make some comments. If you think I'm totally off track with the people that I've put there in regards to my views of whether they sit on the side of, wanting to push back on unaccountable bureaucrats and politicians, let me know. I'm happy for you to call me out of it. I just want the best result. I don't want wasted votes. I don't want 70% of votes exhausted on our side. We see that the progressive left, socialists, Green, Labor voters have been taught and encouraged how to vote. Their preferences will flow to where they're going to want them to flow. We've just got to get it right on our side. Anyway, God bless South Australia. Wishing you all the best. Really, I'm going to continue to talk into this topic between now and March. I'm not going to stop trying to inform you. I'm going to try and bring people on that can talk into these a lot better than me. Again, people that might be able to correct me as well, put some other tilt of thinking towards it. But I'm going to try and keep you informed going forward. So thanks for watching. I really appreciate your time. And as always, if you like what I'm bringing to you, if you like the time and effort that I'm spending, consider obviously sharing, subscribing, and also buying a coffee if you so can, if you're in a position to. I know it's tough, but yeah, just obviously it does help to obviously try and build the platform if I can. I'd love to be able to look at doing something like this full time, but that's totally reliant on you. I'm going to try and do what I can still in the capacity I can with what I've got. But if you like what I'm doing, then I'll love your support. Anyway, God bless. Take care.
Good evening. Could I have your attention for the next 3 minutes? I'd like you to see and hear something which we feel is rather special.
This God-given land of ours, Australia, this proud possession, our own piece of earth, that was built by our fathers who pioneered our heritage. Here in Australia, the land of our birth. Our land, Australia. But should danger ever threaten us, let the world know we will answer the call.